I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Rove from Addicts Games. Rove is a 1 to 4 player campaign dungeon crawl experience, and this over here is a prototype, rules and components subject to change, and I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. There's a bunch of things that'll change. There's gonna be like miniatures for the various enemies or characters. Actually, I don't think the enemies do, I think the characters do. You can check out the campaign page for more information on there. But before we dive into my thoughts, opinions, how the game plays, all of that, two very important notes to get into as far as this review and limitations that might be. The first is that the creator of Rove, the owner of Addicts Games, is both a close personal friend, but also the person I run Level Up Retreat with, which means there's both a work relationship and a personal relationship at play. Take that into account as you go through this. If this review is not for you because of that, then by all means check out the variety of other content creators who have their hands on the game. The second thing I'll note is that this is a campaign experience with a lot of character growth and development. Your Rovers are going to branch into different classes in the game. There's a lot of fun things to see in this game that I haven't had a chance to see. And the combination of both those things, the relationship as well as the limitations in the game, means I will be giving you the things I like, don't like, and see others not liking in this review, but I will be holding off on a score, at least for right now, because there's too many unknowns for me, and of course the relationship at play. But again, I'll be getting into the details, so if you're here for a number score, you won't get that. If you do want to listen to the things I like, don't like, and consider not liking, I will have all that as usual timestamped down below. Let's go ahead and dive into this. I will not be going to every little nitpick, little detail over here. There's a lot of things to cover in this universe, but I will be giving you a general overview of how the game plays, and let's go ahead and start that off now. Rove is a 1 to 4 player campaign dungeon crawl experience. I know I said that already, but there's a lot of things going on here, but you basically are going to be controlling your Rovers. You have your Rovers in the game who have their own abilities, their own reaction cards, their own hand of cards, all giving them the unique actions or the combination of actions that they can do as they try to take on this experience. As Rovers, you're going to be taking on different scenarios one at a time as you slowly progress throughout the game. The game is going to have branching scenario paths, so you can have different scenarios you may or may not have access to at any given point, depending on which options you choose. Sometimes pathways you didn't choose may show up later with different twists, depending on the order you've engaged them. You'll be leveling up your characters as you go through it, gathering more skill cards to your hand of cards that you have over here, because these cards are going to define a lot of the actions you take in the game, and you'll be gathering new skill cards you can add to your hand so you can pick and choose and customize your hand, but you'll also be leveling up a variety of things. I believe you can be leveling up these action cards as well. You'll have the opportunity to develop an arc into different character pathways with new augments, so you go from whatever this class over here is the Dune Dancer, and the Dune Dancer has the opportunity to branch into other classes as they go through the experience, and there's going to be lots of item cards and growth through that way. You're basically building up your character across a series of this campaign. Meanwhile, in this world over here, you're going to be engaging in these scenarios that are going to have both a lot of world building built into it. There's going to have various story arcs. You're going to be making choices as you engage with things, and then ultimately, if you're here for the mechanics, you will be engaging in a specific scenario, and in each scenario is going to be different as far as what you're trying to do. Maybe you're trying to eliminate all enemies. Maybe you're trying to guide a character across the board. Maybe you're trying to survive a certain number of rounds. There's going to be different things you're trying to do in each scenario as you attempt to accomplish those scenario goals. Now, the general arc of a turn that's back and forth, and again, it's a dungeon crawl. You're going to have enemies, you're going to have terrain, you're going to have line of sight rules, you're going to have various blocking terrain that does damage. If you've played any dungeon crawl experience, there's going to be elements of that DNA built into the world of Rove. So again, you have various terrain you can't move into, you have terrain that does damage, you have your starting enemies over here that will vary based on player count to balance around the player count. You have various elements or conditions you can impose either onto the terrain itself or onto other characters as well. You're going to be dealing damage, you're going to be rolling dice over here to modify your damage. You're going to be rolling these ether dice, which will modify the damage you deal based on each character's affinity to that ether. Rove is very heavily invested into the ether, and you're tying into the elements and each character's affinity for better or for worse as they roll a die and modify the damage accordingly. But with all that kind of background there, the general idea of your turn over here is on your turn, you're going to choose 2 basic actions. So you're going to have these actions available to you. You can choose any 2 of them. There's always going to be some degree of movement. There's always going to be some degree of attacking. And then depending on your character, you'll have different combinations of other things. Over here, for example, this character has a melee attack and a ranged attack as some of their basic actions, versus this character lets you force enemies to move around the board and lets you heal as well. So again, each character will have different combinations of actions, but you will have 4 basic actions that are always available to you. Every round, you're going to pick 2 of those actions, as well as 1 card from your hand in any order. The card from your hand There's going to be rallies and raves, and then reactions. Reactions are going to be cards you can do at any given point. If you meet the trigger for the reaction, you get to do whatever the reaction says, and then flip it where you'll have a different reaction available to you. That core concept of flipping cards to be able to change what you have access to at any given point is a key element of how your cards are going to work in Rove, how your hand management, your action management is going to work. So you're choosing, you might have an action where before you're attacked, you get to go ahead and add 1 defense. When you do so, you're going to flip your card, and you've also used your single reaction for the round. But at that point, you might have a new new reaction now. Before you attack, maybe you get to add a condition or an element to the board as well. So you have these different cards that give you different reactions that have a trigger and then resolve an effect limited to one reaction per rover per turn. Then you also have your hand of cards. You have rallies and raves. Some of them are going to generate ether, which is going to be a required element in the game. Others are going to have you spending ether to trigger more powerful actions. So for example, we have Clay Grasp over here, which is going to be a melee action. It's going to do 1 damage by default, although you can roll dice. It has a range of 1, and it'll add that element to the board, but it's also going to generate a green ether for you, which is helpful because you'll find certain cards like this one, the Dual Assault, which is going to cost you 3 ether. It's going to give you an attack that does 2 damage, range 1, but if you spent a green ether as one of the 3 ether, then you get to do an additional damage. Then you get to, again, one ally within 2 performs another attack, and again, if you spent green ether, they get to do additional damage. So you can see how the attacks get more powerful as you have to actually expend ether to trigger them, but not only that, but the type of ether you have is going to be important because you're going to get various benefits or boons as you go ahead and spend certain types of ether. And some cards will give you just straight up specific ethers, others will have you grabbing ether die, rolling it, and adding it to your pool, whatever that ether might be. That's going to be the general idea of your turn. So for example, you go ahead, you'll move around the board, you spend an action, let's say, you go ahead and move, go 1, 2, 3, you do a ranged attack at range 3, you roll a die over here and you modify it based on your chart, you check your chart over here, this one's going to be a 0 modifier, but each character has their own modifier tracks to see whether it does 0 additional damage or less damage, and you go ahead and deal that much damage to that character, hopefully taking them out, although again, not every scenario actually requires you to kill things. Some scenarios are required to survive, to grab various items, to do various things. Killing things usually is good, but not always required. That's the general idea of your turn. All the rovers are going to take their turns, taking their 2 basic actions, a possible reaction, although sometimes you want to save your reaction for the enemy's turn, and then 1 card from your hand that once played will flip and come back to your hand in a different orientation, giving you a different puzzle of which cards you have access to and which actions can you take. Some cards, when you play them, by the way, over here, let's see, we have one over here, for example, some cards will not only flip themselves, but they'll flip other cards as well. So you can go ahead and flip another card, which can be helpful sometimes to be able to get an action back in play without playing the required other side first. That is going to be your turns. The only other things to loosely touch upon is the fact that you're going to have a health pool over here. You have a fixed number of ether you can carry, at least until you level up into different classes or whatnot. You have various items over here you can utilize. The cycle of ether in the game is that you gain ether from a variety of effects. You spend it on cards or actions, and then once you spend it, it goes to your spend pool where you can then use it to power up items in the game. So as you are slowly expanding and gathering more items, again, as you develop through this world, you're going to get more items, access to more items, and the ability to be able to spend your ether that you already spent on being able to activate an action is an important loop that's going to have you really trying to determine which ethers build nicely into your pool, how to build your characters, which cards to add as you level up, which items to augment yourself with, so you have a nice cohesive character. And then lastly, you'll also have summons. Various characters will have summons in the game. Summons are going to have their own way they operate. They come into the board. They're often a bit weaker, but they do have the ability to move, attack, engage in different ways. And that's your turn. Then when you're done with your turn, the enemies are going to activate. On a general enemy turn, you're going to be rolling this dice to track each enemies are going to have little markers over here. For each enemy, you're going to roll this dice and move it that many along. So over here, for example, we roll that, move 1, we roll this one over here, we move 2, 1, 2, it cycles back around. Basically, enemies are going to have 4 possible actions they can take at any given point, and which action they take you don't know, but you can predict with some degree of reliability, since these dice over here have 3 1s, 2 2s, and then 1 3 on them, which means you always know that this is the most likely action that the Terran Ape is going to take. The Quake Stomp is the second most likely action, and there's only a 1 in 6 chance of the Hammer Slam. That predictability or odds-based statistics around what they're going to do lets you plan some degree of knowledge of these characters are likely going to do this, how do I want to react or position myself or set myself up. But once you roll the dice, you go ahead and react, you set them all their actions up, you're going to go ahead and execute all their actions on this board, moving them around as necessary while they usually try to kill you in the game, trying to undo all the good you've dealt in the game. That's basically the cycle you're going to find yourself in. You take your 2 actions, your possible reaction, your card play, you're going to do that with all the rovers, the enemies are then going to activate, trying to do all the things they do. There are various scenarios or things that can have new enemies spawning in the game, so you can have that additional puzzle to go through, and then you also have an element in Rove where you're going to be reading text from the scenario book when different triggers occur. When one of the enemies dies, when you find that item, when you escort that character there, you're going to have a degree of escalating text going on. Sometimes it's just flavor text, other times it actually has game consequences, so you want to be mindful of that as you go through the game experience and try to see what is happening next as you go through Rove. That's the basic idea of Rove. It is a campaign game. I kind of walked you through how his character works in general. I walked you through how his scenario works in general. And then past that, there's the progression you're going to have as you go through this world, trying to discover what the actual storyline is, what your path in that storyline is, which choices you're going to make that will affect that storyline, and trying to ultimately become the best rover you can possibly be. And with that, let's dive into my thoughts on this. Now, I do have a bunch of things I like about this game. I do have some things I don't like about this game, and I have a bunch of things that I want to see more of to be able to see exactly where this game falls for me. To begin with, in terms of things I like, the variety of quest different goals that you have is a big thing for me. I find games like this where it always comes down to just kill everything on the board. I find that's a puzzle that gets a little less interesting very quickly, especially if you're going through a campaign game that's asking a lot of your time. It's asking you to spend a lot of time in this world and really engage with it, and then every scenario is like, kill everything, and that's not as interesting to me. I have played through a lot of scenarios of Rove by now, and there's a variety of different types of killing things, of surviving, of questing, of guiding people, of fetching items. There's a variety of things that will keep you more engaged in the different types of goals that are present in this game, and I like that variety of, variety. I like the variety that the game gives you, so it doesn't just feel like you're playing just different variations of the same scenario time and time again. I like the different decisions needed to survive based on the map, based on the situation, based on who's attacking you. Being able to look at these cards, one of my favorite elements is being able to look at the enemies and having not too overwhelming a pool of different enemies, but being able to look at the different types of abilities they're going to be playing and the statistics around that as well. The statistics to me, as far as knowing that the Briarwog is most likely trying to attack me from range, really affects my turn as far as how I set myself up to be able to close the distance to them, because then they won't be able to attack me, because range attack actually requires range. So you have those decisions at play. You also have the times that won't work out in your favor, where you go through a sequence based on there's a 5 in 6 chance that won't happen, and then sometimes the 1 in 6 chance does happen, and you end up being hit a little too hard. So you do have that trade-off. But I like the ability that there's some degree of planning. There's not a pure randomness as far as what the enemies are going to do. I can kind of predict with not perfect information, so I can't spend too much time min-maxing everything, but with some degree of information as far as being able to plan my turns. I like the fact that you have a hand of cards, so you're trying to work through your actions over here. There's going to be some powerful turns in Rove. Not always, we'll get to that as well, but you're going to have some strong, powerful turns where you get to go ahead and get the right sequence of, I'm going to attack with range, I'm going to attack with melee, I'm going to go ahead and spend 3 either, and do this, which is going to give me 2 attacks over there. You have different elements going on as far as different things that will be happening, giving you stronger attacks you can take as you go through the game. You'll have those powerful turns. You'll have those turns that feel really rewarding as you actually get to do a bunch of things you've been setting yourself up for. But you do. The trade-off there is you do have to spend time and energy setting yourself up for it, because getting those 3 either cards, you can't do those every single turn. In fact, with a handful of cards you have, depending on the scenario length, you have longer and shorter scenarios. But in a typical scenario, you might only be doing 2 of your 3 strength attacks in them the whole time, because you have to work towards powering yourself up and surviving and playing those regular cards along the way as you go through it. But I like that general idea as far as, trying to work your way towards a really satisfying turn. I like the ability to upgrade characters, although this is an area that I really need to see a lot more in Rove to really feel where it ends up. Because being able to upgrade your characters, I can already see that potential as far as, again, this prototype does have access to some of the upgraded cards for their characters, so you could see how you're going to be building and which cards you would take and swap out and be like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and add this, and that's going to combo nicely with my stripped axe over here, and that's going to go ahead and get another item from deck over there, and those combinations are all going to work out. So I can already see the promise of upgrading the characters, but I still need to see more of it to be able to really feel how I'm going to build a character that works for me. I like the fact that if you don't like a particular playstyle, you have a variety of characters that do feel very different. I remember one of the characters I played the most in my early games of Rove is actually one of my least favorite characters, but it took me a little bit of time to actually figure that out. As I tried other characters, I was like, oh, these characters feel more my playstyle. And if you've played games like Gloomhaven, then you might be familiar with the fact that some characters can really work for you and, feel like a great experience, and others not so much, which is always tricky when you're playing these games for the first time, because if you start with a character that doesn't actually resonate with your personal playstyle, you might not decide to continue giving it that chance to try other things. But if you do try Rove, if you do get this game, I do recommend trying out at least 2 or 3 characters to see which one might fit your playstyle and which one might resonate with you the most. But I like the fact that you have that flexibility and that variety as you go through the experience. Now, as far as things I don't like in the game, there are a few things I don't like. First of all, one of the main aspects of the game, as far as the things that make it different, is going to be that flipping card mechanism. The idea that as you spend a card, you flip it and you take a different action. While in principle, I understand what they're going for and I like the idea of it, I find for me, I often am looking at my hand over here and I'm trying to think, okay, well, where was the other card? And don't get me wrong, it does does tell you on the other side, but I'm like looking, oh yeah, that was that ability. So it can take a little time before you find out or get a good flow for exactly what's on the other side, and until you get to that point, you're just trying to find more information, or even just remember which side you put your hand down on the table. Usually for me, that's not been a problem. It's happened a lot where I pick up a hand and try to remember where I am. Usually there was that one card I was going to play next, and if I find that, the whole hand is fine. But there is that aspect of both remembering what your hand is oriented, trying to like look at the other sides. Did you actually flip it back when you did look at the other side? And just the obfuscated information, meaning one of the main mechanics to some degree is obfuscated information. It's not intended to be so, but the way it does work mechanically, I find not as satisfying as, well, a different system, I guess. So it's in a weird element where one of the main elements, I both appreciate the strategic aspect behind it while not appreciating the real world dynamics that come into play because of a system like that. I'll also say that I don't love that you don't need to play all your cards. Now, I'm not going to heavily be comparing this to Gloomhaven as I go through it. I will say the creator of Rove is also the creator of Crimson Scales, with the biggest fan-made expansion for Gloomhaven of all time, or the biggest, I think one of the biggest fan-made expansions of all time, debatably. But either way, Crimson Scales, a huge expansion for Gloomhaven, a fan-made expansion. So he's definitely coming at this with being a fan of that system. But I will say one of the comparisons I'd make is that in a game like Gloomhaven, you are playing through your whole hand of cards before pulling it back, discarding cards, and so you're forced to work with everything you have, which is an interesting, different puzzle than the one Rove forces you to engage with. In Rove, I can have a hand of 5 cards and only end up playing 3 of them. And the fact that I don't need to play all of the cards in my hand is a different kind of mental puzzle, and I almost find not as satisfying. It's something a little bit not as fun as having a card in your hand that you find you don't use the entire time you play it, and at the end you're like, oh yeah, I never really used Desiccating Blast. It just wasn't right for the scenario, and I just ended up using Cray Smash and back and forth, and so you do have that. I wish you had more of a reason to really need to use everything. As it is, I often find myself using the cards that work best for me, which granted can be different in different scenarios, but I like that tenseness of having to use everything. I'll say that for me, a big element of Rove that they really put a lot of effort and energy to is the world building, is the flavor text, the characters, the stories, what's going on. And for me, as someone who doesn't come in appreciating those things out the gate, I'll say that I don't appreciate that as much. A lot of it is very flavorful in terms of how it's approaching it, but I think it really requires you to really dive into the world, which, because it's a prototype, I haven't yet gotten to that point where I'm getting the payoff. Meaning, the best way I could describe the world building of Rove is there's some epic novels I've read in my life that really start off with just way too much information, and you as the reader have no clue what's going on. Now, as you continue to read through those, that all slowly builds up, and you eventually get to a point where it all starts to make sense, and when you come back to that novel later, years later, because it's one of the best books you've ever read, you have all that information, and they really did an excellent job, but it does take time to pay off with that level of intricacy. And to me, it feels like Rove has that kind of approach. They'll be talking about things as if you're supposed to know what's going on, as if you know the dynamics or the rules or the species or all these different things going on in the game. It's very information heavy in a way that there may well be a payoff later, but because this is a prototype and I don't have access to everything, to me it kind of feels like almost information overload in a way that I don't personally find as rewarding, at least right now. The main general story arcs as far as what you're doing and rescuing people and helping people and choosing what to do, that I'm all here for. The higher degree of flavor text, not as present. In fact, there are scenarios in this game where you're playing through it and you interrupt something to read some whole backstory element in the middle of the game, which doesn't do it as much for me. As far as what you might not like about Rove, as far as what it might not work for you or whatnot, I'll say in general, the either action system is an interesting one because you are frequently spending either, and to that end, because you're spending it, you're also earning it, which means on a regular basis, you're gathering your die, you're rolling it, and you're hoping it's the either that works well with your cards. And there are times, like if you have the stripped axe over here, which really benefits from this either over here, if you never really roll that and you're relying only on your cards, well, depending on the cards you have, like if, for instance, the true scale over here doesn't generate as much of the main either that they need, and so they really have to try to find the right combination of cards that will work for you in the game. But otherwise, there's a decent amount of either generation that is pure luck as to whether it goes for you or not. So there is going to be that additional possible frustration depending on how you're going. And that's true as well with the general attacks. Whenever you attack, you're going to be rolling an element die and then modifying your attack based on either you rolled and based on the character's attribute. And so again, that's a healthy dose of luck mixed into your attack. Your 1 damage strike, when it's a -1, is now 0 damage, and that could feel like a wasted action. But the flip side of that is obviously you also have the +2s. You have the +1s as well, so you will have these stronger attacks, but again, that element that luck is present in the game. As far as final thoughts, and again, not rating on this one because I need to see more. Well, before we get to final thoughts, let's cover the biggest thing, because the things I didn't get to see enough of yet, because there are things here that the nature of this being a larger campaign game, I haven't gotten to see a lot of the things that I do want to see the most of. I really do want to build out my characters. I want to get a lot more items and slowly develop them and see how they all work together in tangent. I want to get more item cards and really work towards building up my hand. I want to see those characters arc into different character choices and see how important are those branching paths that the characters have. Does it just feel like you're slowly still upgrading them, or does it actually feel like a unique character as you go through it? And I don't have a sense of that. Or even the world building I mentioned the world building. I want to see how that world building pays off. Right now there's a lot of flowery text, there's all these species and things going on, and there's dynamics and characters. There's all these things happening that I don't have a good sense for the full payoff of that world building. Will it be there, or will I not really feel invested in this? I don't know. And that's a big thing with this. Because of this being a large epic campaign game, I just don't know. Which brings us to the final thoughts aspect, which is going to tie off into what I just said, which is I overall enjoy Rove. Rove is a solid game that gives you a lot of action decisions, lots of ways to combine things, lots of ways to work together with other rovers, trying to find those right tangents as far as how to deal the most damage, how to survive, how to accomplish your goals, depending on what those scenario goals do. And again, they are different scenarios, which is going to give you a fun little interesting puzzle that's not just kill everything all the time. You really need to think through how you want to progress, survive, get that item, escort that person, whatever it is that you're doing. The main thing that's missing for me right now is seeing that payoff over time, is seeing how it develops and how interesting does it get. The reality is that right now, these types of games, giant big box dungeon crawl experiences, they are all over the place. And it's, well, all over the place is a relative term. There's a lot of these big experiences that ask you to give a lot of time and money to get your hands on them. And to that end, they all have to have a hook as to what stands out, what pulls you in, which ones resonate with you or not. For me, where Rove is right now, it's one that I definitely appreciate it, I definitely enjoy it, but I haven't yet gotten to the point where I'm completely and totally hooked. For example, with Gloomhaven, Gloomhaven's a game that the first few times I played it, I didn't really fully get invested until I started to level up my characters and really make choices and really build those characters. And because that's a primary element of Rove that I haven't gotten to see, that's why I still need to see more to see how and where this game develops. That's basically where we are on this one. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, I mentioned Gloomhaven a few times, but if you are interested in a game that's going to have some of the similar DNA of Rove, while being very different experiences, you should definitely check out Gloomhaven or Frosthaven, or if you want an easy way into it, Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, or if you really want an easy way into it, Gloomhaven Buttons and Bugs, but honestly that's so different at this point, I don't know if it's the same thing. And then similarly, Oathsworn. Oathsworn is going to be another big box dungeon crawl experience where you're going to be leveling up your characters across a campaign. It's going to be very different as far as the way that operates, but again, some high level similarities as far as the types and feels of what these games do. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.